costs?
So, I mean, just a layperson, even to me, it appears that the cost of government continues to go this way. And we make adjustments in the tax rate to address this issue, as opposed to asking maybe the broader question, what are we trying to do with the tax? And the cost of government continues to keep this
Perhaps, perhaps if I can restate that, what you're saying is for the typical service consumed, assuming we could measure that, is roughly 6, 7, 8% of your total income what it costs to provide those services. Yeah, it's really tough to measure. First, you have to measure how people consume. What is a typical household consumption? It's more than just on average a school. There's a bunch of different services that you would add to that, but we amend or add to this a lot of other taxes that are not tied to a household necessarily. We could probably estimate property taxes and for income, households with this kind of income, but beyond that, it's tough. So I guess the point is, if you add all those up for this range of people, is what they're paying to the district, roughly the services they receive.
That may be the question.
Yes.
I have a question. It's on option 1. This is a really basic question I'm embarrassed to ask. So when we reduce that bracket by 1% for $30,000 of income, incremental income, so using my keen math skills, 1% of $30,000 is $300. So why, and yet all the other marginal tax rates and the cliffs stay the same, why does higher income people get more benefit than I don't understand why nobody maxes out at $300.
If you lower the 6% rate to 5%,
Yeah.
why are people at higher income levels? I'm guessing it's because they have this is by adjusted gross income, so the total income. So some people in sort of middle income brackets, they have high adjusted gross income, but deductions of other things may be knocking their taxable income all the way down, and so they don't actually get any benefit for the income tax.
Because what we're saying here is almost any adjustment we make, even in a middle class threshold, is going to have a much larger bump at higher income people, at virtually anything.
Yeah, modestly larger.
So what would be helpful, another thing is to look at, for these thresholds here, the number of filers. So how many families would benefit $100? How many, like, is that the million plus, how many people is that? As opposed to how many filers were in that. But in general on this stuff, I would love to cut everybody's taxes. That would be the best job in town. But when you prioritize stuff in terms of what we're trying to incentivize, in terms of retaining families, addressing child care costs, housing costs, I think personal individual income for me would rank low below business competitiveness. We've never been competitive with individual income tax, ever even close, and we never will be. And I think it gets to the point of do we have enough money to have the schools that David says we don't have? Maybe spending more is not the answer, but cutting the government off for more money probably isn't the answer either. So I would just put tax relief towards businesses instead of individuals. But I do like the indexing idea. It creates us a long-term plan of giving everybody a little bit of a break every single year, and it's just fair, and it does not disincentivize additional income or at least penalize it.
So strictly on the data, Gregory, I have the data you want, just not on my hands. Broadly speaking, there are more people in the lower income. I don't want to make it sound like it's a total, diagonal line, but there are fewer wealthy people than there are lower income people. But I can get you that data, and I can just blast that out to the group to just give what that is, because
what percentage of the benefit goes to people earning over $500,000?
Could also get you that, but
Okay.
Again, just don't have it at my fingertips. Another thing to think about.
This is somewhat misleading here insofar as it implies that most of the benefit goes to people earning. What you're just saying is if you do make $1 million, you get more.
Yes.
There may be a few people at that level, so it may be a small amount in the aggregate. Could be.
Yes, yeah, and it's just
Yeah.
how you slice and dice it, and so we wanted to share like average household, but I can pull that data really quickly. On the why it goes up a little bit, we're gonna talk about how the district doesn't have two brackets a little later, but there is the status of married filing separately on the same return, which can allow two earners to split their incomes and put them on the track. And so that means two people, if they're married, could both benefit from the tax reduction, or the rate reduction. And again, broadly speaking, higher income households are more likely to be married, more likely to get that advantage, so they're more likely to have a household getting, say, a $600 cut than the lower income households, which are more likely to get a $300 cut. And so you're right, it's always kind of hard to explain all the nuances in the bar graph, but again, broadly speaking, a higher income household is more likely to be a married couple, more likely to have two people possibly on the track, and therefore more likely to get two kinds of reductions from the rate reduction, if that makes sense.
So can I, please jump in, please. I mean, one of the things I think would be interesting to look at if we have a chance to is what it would cost relative to this to have to the middle income. I think the 28% across the board is ridiculous and reckless, and not people recommend that, but if there's a way to target like a credit or like a personal exemption credit or some other kind of credit to the middle class where you could actually provide substantial benefit there, reduce how much, the share of their income that they're paying in income taxes, but also not confer a bunch of benefits to folks, above a certain level who don't really need it. And I do think we have a commitment in this city to a progressive tax code that is based on ability to pay, and so we are asking people who do very well in the city, who make very large incomes, to pay more, to contribute a greater share of their income to help us pay for the services that we all need and use. So, I mean, I wouldn't be in support of those big across the boards, and I would love to see something that's more targeted if we wanted to take a look at the middle class.
Richard, can you tell us about the average effective rate? So over the last 10 years, our average effective rate, because we started increasing rates on top earners, 2014-15. So our effective rate has grown by 20% in 10 years. That's just the reality. So even, these council's incremental tax adjustments that have been budget driven over 10 years have had a real effect on the effective tax rate we're all paying. I think giving relief to the folks in that 60 to whatever that ultimate upper threshold is, would, because there are so many taxpayers in that, would affect our average effective tax rate, would drive it down and would give relief to folks who are struggling, who do see their costs going up. Gregory, I didn't mean education. I meant it because many people don't feel like they can get quality public education. I'm not indicting anyone for it. I'm telling you what the population feels. The same is true for public safety. That paying 8% here versus 8% in Fairfax, you get a different level of public safety for that 8%. And to your point, I think we've never asked how much should it take to provide this basket of services. Really, we don't ask that. You know what I mean? Like, what would an efficient basket of services cost us? So when you go to the millionaire who might pay, $100,000 in DC taxes, and you ask her, what did you get for your $1 million? Because I think people ask that question, like, what did you get for your $1 million?
They probably got a beautiful neighborhood with beautiful parks and great schools and all the things that they ever wanted here in the district. I think that's
agree.
They walk to the restaurants in Georgetown.
Look,
There's so many
I feel like we should be looking after what the workforce, in which I thought you were originally saying to stop at 60, and I think it's important that we look at the teachers, the first responders, all of those who, I think it's very difficult in the city if you make $150,000, you don't have a lot of extra disposable income in this city anymore. And I think that's a group we need to look for.
Looking at data on who's living in the city using IRS data, we have also seen that a lot of the middle income folks have been exiting. A couple of years ago, we did a survey of parents who either didn't send their kids to DC public schools or could have sent their kids to DC public schools but decided to move either to the suburbs or chose private schools. What we found is that a larger share of these families who moved from DC to the surrounding counties, we didn't look at outside of the metro area, just surrounding counties, were middle income households. So we are losing that at a faster rate. So I think that some sort of tax relief at that level is important. Although I have to point out that then we'll all have to agree that tax rates matter when people move. So we've heard a lot of arguments against that. So I think, however, the first proposal, it's important to remember that it came as a part of the package that also incorporated real property tax increases and sales tax increases. Whether we agree on that or not is irrelevant, but I think it's important context to remember. I do worry, however, how are we going to pay for this if we go through a middle income tax relief? Do we pay for this through a business activity tax? Do we pay for it through a property tax increase? I think it's something. That's why I kind of pause about.
So we might look at what our expenditures are.
I think there are triggers, Yesha, because I'm concerned as well. We don't want to have a parade of horribles about all the things we're going to cut in communities. But recently we had another example of increased revenue projection over the 5-year plan, over what was budgeted. And so when additional revenue comes in, rather than spend it, those could be used to pay for some of these reductions, subject to triggers that are responsible. That would be my preferred approach.
I think that's a great idea. I do worry about, however, the probability of having, unless Glenn and his team get even more, pessimistic, it's really going to face a very difficult few years from a revenue perspective.
Agreed.
Thank you. Helpful discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Richard now to talk us through some of the tax credit proposals. Just want to acknowledge our guests in the back of the room who are here as resources. Thank you for coming.
Okay, so for our guest, our next item up is the proposal is to enact a refundable child tax credit. The origin is a piece of legislation introduced by Councilmember Parker as well as 8 of his colleagues on the DC Council. We also had a child tax credit recommended by the Fair Budget Coalition. The District of Columbia does not currently offer a child tax credit. 14 states do, including 11 that offer a refundable tax credit. You may be familiar with the child tax credit in large part because it was a central component of the federal government's American Rescue Plan, where the child tax credit has been around since the 90s. It was expanded during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and it was significantly expanded for 1 year as part of the American Rescue Plan to pump money into families to help them get through the pandemic. While that expired, it inspired a lot of states to come up with their own CTCs. In fact, most of the current state CTCs have been enacted since 2021 because they were directly inspired by that legislation. We're going to look at 3 child tax credits. Before I get into that, I'm going to kind of do this in reverse order. I'm going to do the arguments and then go into the policy details. The arguments for change is that a child tax credit is a very simple and direct way to support children. We have a lot of evidence from the federal child tax credit that when it was expanded, it provided a lot of money to homes, and those homes used the money to pay for basic needs like clothing, food, rent, and utilities. We also have a lot of data that showed that when the federal CTC was expanded, child poverty declined, and when it went away, it went back up. A CTC, unlike the earned income tax credit, which we'll talk about next, which requires, you might guess, earned income, can be provided to families with no or low, very low income. The arguments against it would be that the district already provides a very generous earned income tax credit, the most generous earned income tax credit in the country, although, as a footnote, most of the states that offer a child tax credit also offer an earned income tax credit. And then there are some arguments there related to a separate but related proposal, which is that you could, with a child tax credit, provide the benefit monthly. Again, that was part of the federal proposal. It gave the monthly that allowed families to get it on schedule, which let them make rent payments, make them utility payments, as opposed to a one-time credit. But if you do that, one, it can be administratively challenging for OCR to get that out. There is also an issue having to do with SNAP benefits that should be flagged. There is language that directly says that if it's a lump sum, it's okay. We don't know if you do it in monthly if that would happen. It's just we do not know. Minnesota's considering it, so it's just kind of like an outstanding question that we're still working through. Okay, to the actual proposal, we're going to look at 3 child tax credits. And broadly speaking, if you decide to go for a child tax credit, there's 4 things you would consider. One is the amount of the credit. The Parker proposal was for a $500 credit, so we made all of our 3 $500 just for simplicity. There is making it refundable or non-refundable. Refundable, again, means that you can get it if you do not have taxable income. All of ours are refundable. It's kind of the thrust of what we think you're going to go for, and you would be leaving out a huge share of DC families if you did not make it refundable. So all our proposals are refundable. Then there is age. The federal child tax credit is for, you get it if you have children who are 17 or younger. And Parker's proposal also was for children who have 17 and younger. And then there's also the phase out. And the Parker proposal has a phase out beginning at roughly $100,000 for single filers and $145,000 for married filers. To kind of show you the full range of what we can do, we put 2 proposals on the table, one that's far more restrictive than the Parker proposal, and one that's a little more broad than the Parker proposal. The restrictive one would only apply to children, families who have children who are younger than age 6, and that would phase out at $30,000. Whereas the broad one would again be available to the families who have children younger than age 17, but the phase outs would begin at higher levels, $200,000 and $400,000. If you look at you jump into the distributional analysis, we ran all 3 through it, but the Parker proposal is the one with the graph. And you'll see that there's 2 bars. One is for all households, and one is for households getting a tax cut. We do this because 12% of DC households would benefit from the Parker proposal. It's 12% because you gotta have kids. And so the reason we show both is if you look at the average tax cut for all DC, it's roughly $85, but that's everyone. If you look at just those who are getting it, just those with family, the average tax cut is $710. Again, that's just gonna be benefit on like how many kids you have is how many $500 credits you get. Other things to know is that while this would go, if you have children, you get the same benefit. But if you think about the racial equity implications, children in the district are more likely to be Black and Latino. So while everyone who is eligible gets the same, it would have a disproportionate positive effect on Black and Latino households because they are more likely to have children and more likely to have multiple children. Then just going back to the broader and restrictive ones in the little table, all that is showing you is, again, that these are policy levers that you can pull, and the more restrictive you make it, the fewer households that will get it, the more broad you make it, the more households that you can do. Again, we gave everyone the same credit, but something some policymakers in states have done is they've decided to make it restrictive, but a really big credit. So for example, Oregon limits it to families who have children younger than 6 at very low amounts of income, but they give a $1,000 credit. Whereas some credits will do something very broad. It applies to children who are younger than 17. It goes to pretty much everyone regardless of income, but it'll be a lower level credit. I think that's enough to tee it up. Happy to answer any questions and allow you to take the conversation from here.
Can I add a couple of details because we do know actually what happens with SNAP. If the monthly payments do affect SNAP eligibility to benefit level determinations. And I know there's a proposal here for the opt-out for EITC monthly payments. talking to some folks about that already in council. But they did reject FNS rejected our planned amendment, the amendment to our SNAP plan to make sure that monthly payments didn't count against benefit levels.
So wait, so with the EITC, did DC make the change and therefore allow it, or have people lost their SNAP benefits as a result of monthly payments?
Well, we don't really know that yet,
Okay.
but the first year of the expanded EITC, you got your normal 40% is the lump sum, and then you got the expanded part over that in monthly payments, only if it exceeded $600. So it's probably a pretty small universe of people. I don't think we know yet what the impact's been. The other thing I'll just say is we heard from OTR conversations we've been having that the monthly payments for folks who are going out and getting refund anticipation loans, they are charged for that loan per transaction, and so the fact of monthly payments has actually been causing some folks to lose money. So I just wanted to name those components. I also would just say that I think a child tax credit is really important for us to do. I think taking aim at child poverty is really important for goals around racial equity and a racially equitable tax code. It's good. Help us ensure a stronger future for kids, for families, for our economy. I think, everybody talks here a lot about education. I think it's probably the single biggest thing we can do for our school system is actually to reduce poverty and the kind of hardship that kids are facing in their day-to-day lives. I think our schools that are dealing with kids and in communities that face, extreme levels of economic hardship just have a much harder job than our schools in wealthier neighborhoods in the city. So, the outcomes that we want to see would be helped tremendously by getting more cash to kids in poor and low-income families. And there's tons of research that backs that up. So, the only thing I would say, and I'm so excited about Councilmember Parker's proposal being before council, is that I would love for us to go bigger than $500 per kid. And we've put out an analysis that shows a $1,500 per kid credit would actually lift about 4,000 kids out of poverty relative to the supplemental funds.
So, I'm sorry, are you finished? I would also want to recognize that we've been joined by Ward 5 Councilmember Zachary Parker, and thank you for the proposal, Councilman. This is something that he will confess. He and I spoke about this morning, and I like it very much. My only tweak would be on increasing the amount for married filers. If a single filer gets it for $100,000 to $125,000, it seems that we would want to offer for married couples the opportunity to have both work, to both get it as well. And so that wouldn't be $145,000 phase out. Wouldn't be between, as is proposed, 145 to 175, and between 200 and 250. And again, this is all fungible based on what we can afford. I just want to go back to the notion that I want to make sure that 2 teachers are eligible and get this, right? I'm intrigued by this as a way, perhaps as an alternative to an adjustment of the rates generally that we might not be able to afford. This would be a cheaper alternative to what could be a middle income tax benefit for families, as opposed to taking the rate from 8.5 to 6.5, which would benefit everybody. My question is, and this could be heresy, but could we not tether part of the credit to payments into opportunity accounts? In other words, this commission has talked a lot, and we talk a lot about, disparities in wealth, but we don't actually do anything about it other than celebrate the problem. Nothing that we have suggested is going to make these families any wealthier than when we started. And yes, everyone can appreciate that dollars today are valuable, but savings does require sacrifice. And if these are additional dollars that we are providing for families, why couldn't some of it be either designated for the opportunity accounts, which allow for retirement, medical emergencies, home ownership, and education. What is the heresy in that?
See, the urgency of now. I think there are crises in families right now with children on the precipice of lives that are going to go the wrong way perhaps, and these investments early on, as Eric alluded to, make a profound investment. When you look at what we've done with universal pre-K and now the 0 to 3 bill, our city has done something that I think any other city in the country has done, and the NAEP scores now of kids that are 7 and 8 that had started with the universal pre-K, they bumped up, and that is the best way to give these kids a pathway to a life. And what I heard in the research, Senator Manchin's comments notwithstanding, parents spend this money well, they spend it on the right things, and they know what's best to help their kids. We all talk about choice and parental responsibility. This is it. This is a way to say to a parent, step up and make those decisions. And by and large, they make these decisions very well. So I feel very comfortable putting these dollars right now into the pockets of parents making the right decisions.
You do have data on DC that show that 90% of households getting the federal child tax, the expanded federal child tax credit in 2020, whose incomes were below $35,000, spent it on basic needs. So it's food, clothing, rent, their utility bills, their mortgage payments, or their rent. So I think, you know, it's, as Gregory says, like the needs for folks with very low incomes are so high.
And what I'm saying is that we discuss all the time the lack of wealth generation. And if we are going to give a benefit above and beyond what exists right now, having the capacity for some of that to be dedicated to these opportunity accounts so that kids could have a chance to go to college, et cetera. I mean, if you look at the truancy data, it's pretty clear. We have single-digit truancy in our city until they hit 9th grade. And then it goes off the chain. They didn't all of a sudden come from different places. There is a very specific reason why truancy is in single digits in every school across the city until they hit 10th grade. And last year, we just saw the data, 94% of Baloo students had Where's the heresy there? I get the urgency of now, Gregory, but there's also tomorrow.
Well, I think we can do both, but these have a definite urgency of now focus. We know they're needed. The child poverty rate here is it 12?
It's
Is it 12%?
Depends on who you're talking about, but it's
Lower or?
It depends on where you live. So in the city, across the street, it's around 12%, but there's certain parts of the city where that number is double.
I mean, for black people in the district, it's 21%.
How many families are we talking about?
Excuse me?
How many
Gross
families?
numbers.
Again, data that I have, but I didn't put in the memo, so I don't have. I mean, we do, it's roughly 1 in 10 DC households.
Can we do both, Dave?
Like,
That's what I'm suggesting.
Let's do it.
100,000.
I'd be interested in a full refundable tax credit
have
plus what you're talking about.
That's what I'm saying. I think
Sure.
be both.
most families have income because if you look at that, so if you look at the household data that we have, if you look at the dark blue lines, these are like average across all DC. So that's not an accurate depiction of the amount of the money they're getting, but it is an accurate description of who is getting it. And so you'll see, this is basically saying that the households who are getting this credit are most likely to have incomes between $10,000 and $40,000. That is where most people earn. If you look at the $10,000, it goes down. And we've seen this when we've looked at CTCs across the country. The lowest income households are less likely than like low, but not the bottom income group to have children. Now, a part of that is if you have zero or very low income, you probably don't file taxes. because you don't have any reason to. You don't owe and you don't get a benefit. So if DC did something like this, it would be very advantageous for their joint efforts to go out and connect with those families and say, there's a benefit for you, we want you to come in and we want you to file taxes. And that was done by states across the country when the federal one happened. But by and large, 10 to 40 is where you have the highest concentration, but of course there are children and income groups up and down the spectrum.
And the thinking behind, and that's, when you talk about refundable and non-refundable, has to do with your,
If the credit was non-refundable, you would have to have a tax liability, and in the district, you've got to earn roughly $30,000. So if we made this non-refundable, all the bars would go away for the group 0 to 30,000, and it would only be for those that are earning above that threshold. So it has to be refundable, or else you can't reach the lower income families.
I don't know how granular we're gonna get with the final recommendations, but assuming this is in the positive side, which I certainly hope it is, are we gonna get into gradation of it in terms of cost? So, and if we did, I'd like to know what our feelings are regarding age of the child versus income as a way to save money, if that's where we come to at the end. I wonder what people think.
I mean, one of the reasons that other states have like a bump for young children or target young children is because they don't, state and local governments and actually the federal government as well, like don't spend as much on young children or spend very much relative to older children, but we actually make quite a bit of investment in young kids here in the district because of pre-K and so forth, and expanded childcare subsidies that we're trying to expand even more, right, to make childcare affordable for every family. The other thing I think other places have looked at is like the relative poverty rates for very young children versus older children. There's no difference here. Last time I looked at the data, it's not statistically different for like the 0 to 6 and the kids above that age. So to me, it didn't feel like there was as much reason to have the young child targeting here in DC. But certainly the younger you can get support to kids, the better.
do we have the data, which I'm sure you do, on what the results have been of the investment the city's made to date in early education in children?
I mean, I don't have like an economic output data point on that, although I did
The
ask.
NAEP scores went up.
Huh?
The NAEP scores
The
went
NAEP
up.
scores have come up. I can just say as a parent of 2 young kids that, it's also a big deal for my family to have that investment in my kids when they were 3 and 4 and not pay that childcare cost for those 2 years.
No,
So I think there's a boost
but
there
if
too.
things like our literacy rates,
Yeah.
things like that
Yeah.
increase. I mean, I get that, and I appreciate that, but we have tangible.
There's a recent paper that focused on across the country, not just DC, and tried to differentiate between high quality childcare and low quality childcare. It was a longitudinal study, so they started tracking kids at very early ages all the way through high school. So the paper, it's kind of difficult because they differentiated between high quality childcare and low quality childcare by nature of the interactions between the kids and the caregivers and whatnot. But what they found is when compared to kids who attended lower quality childcare, kids who attended the higher quality childcare, which we're striving to achieve here, had fewer behavioral problems. They had less issues with impulse control. They actually did so much better academically, not just early years, but in the later years. And they also had a greater chance of actually attending college. So the returns to investment can be significant. It's just all of these studies, we don't have anything specific to DC, and again, the definition of high quality versus low quality, it's a tricky one.
But there is a lot of different kinds of research out there showing that early interventions in the lives of kids, growing up in hardship makes a big difference in their life trajectories, including getting cash to families.
I'm for anything that helps with the literacy rate, because I think that's one of the highest.
In
correlated.
contrast, for example, Head Start, something that the federal government invested a lot, very controversial because we all thought it was great and it turned out, there are some studies that don't find. positive effects from Head Start. So, anyways, I think what I like about this proposal is it's very broad. It goes up all the way to much higher income levels. I think, David, your point is well taken that can be a substitute for a middle income tax deduction. Also, I'm kind of thinking about when you look at where taxpayer growth is coming in DC right now, it's all singles, very young singles. It's those between the ages of 25 and 34. That's good because for like the health of the city, the household count matters, not just the population. But what it makes me think about is when the millennials moved to the city in mid-2000s, they stayed here, formed families, and then sent their kids to school, and they became an important part of our tax base. We kept them as their incomes grew. And something like this can actually keep these young households as they form families, if they form families, and in the city. So there's a competitiveness argument to it too, not just the impacts on the lives of children, which I think is very important. So I would support the broadest we can pay for, both in terms of age range and in terms of incomes.
An amount? Is
An
all?
amount, yeah, whatever we can do, I think we should do.
And we have 1,500 put on the table. As a
And
range.
that's capped at 3 children, is that right?
You're saying
Mine was
$1,500
not.
per child.
Oh, depends. The
Councilmember Parker's does. You know, most families don't get a lot bigger than that, but.
Then I think it's fine to have capped, right?
I just want to plug again the notion that if we are going to give a benefit, giving people whether it's voluntarily or not, the option of putting a portion of that away for savings is powerful. Because the child who is the beneficiary of that in an opportunity account directed from a child's education, it's like this 529. You might look at yourself and your own value differently if you're getting a statement that says you have 3 or 4, 10 or whatever that amount is, $1,000 by the time you graduate. You might start to have the thought that, well, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could apply for college. Maybe I could. And I just think that if we're going to get serious about wealth creation and narrowing the gap, that's why I authored that bill all those years ago, and there's a waiting list to get on it. If we're going to put money in pockets, give them the chance, and I'd also I'd do a tax exemption, if I'm honest, on all those investments, right? And I'd also make these accounts tax-free. It's a little bit, but every bit counts.
I would support that if it's optional and not mandatory.
But it would need, in my view, a healthy educational component.
That's great, and we should do it. We also have a baby bonds program that may be a good interaction between this and what you're doing.
How is that different than you're describing?
Well, the opportunity accounts are beyond that, right? The opportunity accounts allow people to buy a home. I'm assuming that the parents would be responsible for it. And the opportunity accounts allow parents to either save for a medical emergency or educational purposes, allows them to invest in a home, not only home ownership, but business investment, retirement, medical emergencies, those kinds of things. So it's
I think
broad.
that's great, but I just think, for the record, I think there are a lot more families facing food insecurity than are gonna have the luxury of that decision.
But he says it's optional, number one, and number two, is there a proposal for a sliding scale where we offer more help to?
There will be middle-income families who
Yeah.
also benefit from this. And so, if it is optional, it may be the middle-income family that's struggling to figure out where they're going to send their kids and so on and so on. So I just want us to have a wider lens about what we're doing. It can't all be restricted to one segment of the population. It has to be towards a broad-based, healthy population.
Do you want to take a break, Doctor? Yeah, it's 7:30. We take a 10-minute break. Turn at 7:40. Thanks.
Are we gonna do all the ESBC as a group as well?
Yes. We're now going to turn to a package of EITC-related proposals that Richard is going to walk us through.
Okay. We just did a child tax credit, which is a refundable tax credit based solely on children. We're now going to move to the earned income tax credit, which is a tax credit tied to both income and family characteristics. We have 5 EITC proposals, numbers 5, 6, 7, 9, and 10. To try and make this a little simple, I'm going to give an overview of what the EITC is and what it looks like in the District of Columbia. And I'm going to package 5, 6, and 9 together because they're very much related and let you discuss them. Then I'll go back to the other 2 and let you discuss those. So to broadly talk about the earned income tax credit, this is again a federal policy that the district conforms with. So at the federal policy, the way the EITC works is that the earned income is pretty important because you must earn income to get the credit. So at low levels of income, the amount of the credit goes up as your income goes up, from roughly 0 to $10,000 or $15,000, depending on what your household looks like. You get more credit the more you earn. That's why the EITC is an incentive to work. You are getting more as you work. The EITC then plateaus, federal, and then it starts to decline and phase out toward the end until for families with children, it phases out around $40,000 or $50,000. For those without children, it's much lower. It phases out around $20,000. Credit is far lower if you do not have children on your tax return than if you have children. This is a good time to note, I'm going to use the term childless workers often. When I say childless worker, all I'm saying is that that individual does not have a child on their tax return. He or she very well may have a child, but that child is possibly claimed by the other parent or a grandparent or another guardian. But it's important when you file tax because the ability to get this credit and the size of the credit varies dramatically whether you do not or do have a child on the return.
So we call that a tax child.
Oh, do we?
Sure, why not?
I haven't even used that term. That's rough. Okay. Anyway, so there's the federal credit, and then 31 states in the District of Columbia offer a state earned tax credit. And pretty much every state does this where they say, go calculate your federal credit, and then take a share for the state. And that can range anywhere from, for example, in Louisiana, they say you get 5%. The district has the highest, where it currently is 70%. And in fact, it's going to grow to 100% in 2026. The difference is childless workers in DC already get 100% because the 2013 Tax Commission looked at the disparity between childless workers and those with children and said, it's too restrictive and the benefit is too low, so we're going to inflate that. The District of Columbia also has made changes where they are now, as Erica mentioned, give some of it monthly, to kind of table that for a little bit. Some of the benefit monthly. And the other ways that states across the country have been breaking, because again, they typically use the federal calculations and the federal eligibility rules, but they're starting to see some disconnects, which is one, people can give bigger credits like DC does to childless workers. Another way to do this is to give credits to workers who have ITINs, independent taxpayer numbers. That is, they don't have social security numbers. Because the federal credit does not go to people who do not have social security numbers. The district credit does, and a handful of other states also do that. And then there's also an age restriction, where at the federal credit, you cannot, if you do not have a child on your tax return, you cannot get it if you are younger than age 25 or if you are older than age 65. And so with that, I think I've now built up to, again, look at proposals 5, 6, and 9. And so what these proposals would do is, one would just, again, increase that percentage match for childless workers. To remind you again, when we were in the 2013 commission, everyone got 40%. And then we said childless workers deserve 100% because they get such a smaller credit. So for example, the biggest credit you can get if you don't have children at the federal level and in DC because it's 100 is $560. But you can get anywhere between $3,700 and $7,000 if you have children. So the credits are just far smaller for childless workers, and so that's why we said they deserve to get a higher match than families with children. But now, because of recent legislation, it's going to go back to being parity. So one proposal would again bump the childless workers above everyone else to account for the fact that the federal credit is so small for them. You would do this because childless workers are pretty much the only group that we still tax into pocket. So much of the federal benefits and therefore the district benefits are tied to households with children, which makes a lot of sense. You want to support children. We've had a great conversation about that. But if you look at the households, the workers who benefit from the district's larger childless worker benefit, you're talking about unmarried, young, and lacking a college education, but also full-time workers. And so there's also, as we talked about in 2030 a lot, this is a group that we want to encourage to work almost the most, that we want to go out there and build homes, possibly get married, build wealth. But this is the one group that we constantly leave behind. Another thing related to this is that if you look at it, I don't want to pull up the actual graphs, but there's very little difference between if you don't have children, if you're married or unmarried. And so if you are married and don't have children, it's very hard to get this credit. And so a separate or possibly related proposal would be both to increase the amount of the credit, but also make it so that we get rid of what again we call the marriage penalty, so that if you don't have children, you would have the same chances of getting this credit. So eliminating that barrier, again, to help those type of workers. And then the last one in this batch is for the younger and older workers. Colorado, California, Maine, Maryland, Minnesota, New Jersey, and New Mexico have made some type of change to let childless workers younger than age 25 get this credit. We don't spell this out in the memo, but in conversations with colleagues and experts who've done this, the reason that you can't get this if you're 20 is basically Congress was like, we don't want to give this to college kids. They were worried that if they didn't have an age limit, some college kid from an affluent family would get the credit and it would look bad. But what this does is it ends up hurting everyone who goes to a trade school or just starts working, preventing them from getting this. And so if you took away the age limit, yes, you would be helping some kid in Georgetown who made $10,000 one year, but you also would be helping lots of more people who are just going out there and getting jobs and working full time, because that's what you have to do to get the benefit. In terms of the older residents, I guess the reason the federal one is given to them is because they're eligible for Social Security. But again, if you think about, the whole point of this is to incentivize work, and if you're an older worker, you're also working and therefore could ostensibly be just as eligible for the benefit as everyone else. So I think that's my presentation, and so I'll throw it over to you.
Question.
Yeah.
You talked about college kids. Can someone claim this credit if they're already declared as a dependent on their parents' returns?
No, because I feel like you'd have trouble getting anything if you're dependent.
So I think that would take care of most
A lot of college students.
Most, yeah.
Mine wouldn't be my tax.
Again, I think my read is that,
plan.
yeah.
Or insurance.
But my read is this was very political, not data driven. It was just the idea that someone would get it and then they would get, again, this passed decades ago. Yeah, but you're right, yes.
Do these proposals do or don't change the income threshold for eligibility?
You could do both. So currently, the federal band is very restrictive. If you do not have children, you can't get this credit if you earn more than 15 or 18,000. In DC, you can earn upwards of 25,000, and we absolutely could broaden it even more. In fact, I think one of the proposals explicitly states, basically just give those without children the same band as a household with one child.
Which is?
37,000.
Okay.
And so you could, one, make it broader, because that would bring more workers into the credit, and then you could also, or increase the match to increase the credit going to them.
Richard, what's the income level that a person qualifies for the ITC?
So a childless worker, you would basically, if you're for the federal level, you have to earn basically less than 18,000. For DC, you have to earn less than 25,000.
So it's 200%, more or less 200% of federal poverty, a little less.
200, what did you say, David? 200% of what?
Of the federal poverty level.
Okay.
Right?
I just
So it's around that level. So I'm just curious, if you have information, what other states offer the 100% threshold currently?
So the district was the very first state to do anything for these workers. Since they have, a handful of other states have joined them in either giving a higher match, or maybe a few have done the income, but a few have done the match. It's typically smaller. So like I feel like Maine offers a 50% match to childless workers. A handful of others. The one that I know is Maryland. Maryland has now joined the district and also offering a 100% match, but I am not sure if they have changed the income range to be eligible to claim it.
So that's interesting, because I'd be interested to know a little more about if you could offer us these states, at what levels and what the income levels are. And the reason, looking at these things in isolation, it's easy to say, gosh, well, who wouldn't support this? This makes sense. We want to help people work and earn more. That makes a lot of sense. What I'd like to know, though, is what our totality of benefits for the population might look like. And so, for instance, the district, everyone, regardless of immigration status, under 200% of poverty gets free medical care, free medical insurance, right? And so that's a benefit that's not afforded, for instance, to our neighbors to the north and south that have lower income thresholds. 135%, we're at 200%, or Texas it's 38%. So you have loads and loads and loads of places that don't offer what is a substantial benefit for healthcare, which should be considered in the basket of income. Okay? In other words, our person who makes double the poverty level may or may not be in a better position than someone in Maryland without knowing the total basket of goods and services offered by the city. And if we are in a relatively good position versus Maryland, maybe we look, or Virginia, maybe we look at the 22 million to fund something else, like the tax credit for parents or whatever. All I'm asking is if you have links, additional information to help us get smarter on this, it would help in the balancing of what we privilege versus what we don't.
So I absolutely can provide what other states do on the earned income tax credit. The basket of goods is far harder because you're just pulling in a lot more data. So I don't think I would be able to pull that together. I mean, I will say, as someone who worked on the 2013 commission, is proud of it. One of the reasons we did this is because, you know, people like President Barack Obama and former Speaker Paul Ryan all talked at the federal level about how important this was, how this was the one group of workers who were disproportionately burdened in the tax code, but Congress just doesn't do anything. And then DC was the only one to go out and take a step and enact something on this. But I think your point on priorities and understanding that it's only so many tax codes we can hang out is well taken.
Look, I may be full circle on this and support this. I just want to know more because we've got to make trade-offs, that's all.
Can I ask you the clarifying question? The district's minimum wage is like, what, $17 now?
Oh, gosh.
So if you multiply that by 52 and 40, you get a number like $30,000. And this was a recent increase in the series of increases. I'm just kind of curious, who qualifies? Like, is it part-time workers? I mean, do you have any?
Yeah, and I also think a lot of low-wage workers don't have, you know, jobs that are like full-time year-round either. So folks might be part-time, they might be contingent.
Yeah.
You know, they may be part-year. There's different reasons people may not get like the full, whatever, 30, whatever thousand.
There was an ORA study, now this is looking at like 2015, and so it's looking at a very different minimum wage, and that one said the individuals most likely to benefit were male, full-time worker, ages 25 to 30.
Yeah, and I'm looking at their data, and they show 24,000 or so eligible. What's our labor force? 350,000, something like that, right? So it's a small group. I kind of think that it's worth asking ORA if they can give us an updated sort of list of characteristics. Maybe you know, Daniel's report is very well detailed. Maybe it's hard to do it in a short period, but like how many people are eligible to me would be interesting.
I do think, you know, when people talk about take-up rates for EITC and how to improve them, one way to do that is to increase the credit for the so-called childless worker. You know, folks are more likely to file their taxes and claim the credit if it's more sizable, so like in terms of trying to get uptake up, it's one strategy. I also just wanted to add Maryland got rid of the lower age requirement, so it's down to 18. And they did that years ago to sort of try and help folks out when they first leave high school and are just trying to get kind of a toehold in the workforce to provide that support.
That's another interesting question. If we were to reduce the age limit, how many people, we're most likely going to have kids who were born and raised in DC, because they're most likely to be holding jobs like cashiers and things like this. They're least likely to be attending university. So we have enough, but I think we should put our arms around exactly how many people that might be.
Okay, anything else on this? Okay, the two other EITC, let's do number, apologies, we got these out of order. So number 10. Okay. Because number 10 is, as Erica was describing when we talked about CTC, when the district government most recently expanded its EITC, for all, not just child, but for all, they decided to give a portion of that tax credit in monthly installments if you were above a certain level. And so this is pretty much affecting, think of families, multiple children earning like roughly 30 to 40,000. That's who's gonna be in the most likely, because you have to have, the rule is you have to have an EITC greater than $1,200 to get this. And so starting this year, when people were filing taxes in the spring, if you had the EITC above a certain level, you automatically got it in monthly payments. And so you would go, and I served as a tax volunteer, and so you saw this happen. You would go, and in previous years, you would go and you calculate your EITC, you would get your return, and then you would get your refund. This year, you would go, you would calculate your EITC and all your other tax stuff, but a portion of that EITC would be withheld. It would not go to the filer in their tax refund. They would then get it in monthly installments.
Why?
The thinking behind this was that it was pitched as a way of providing basic income. Again, there was lots of analysis done on the expanded federal child tax credit that said monthly payments were good because they helped people who had, as Greg was saying, monthly needs. When you have rent, you have utilities, it can't all wait for one time. The difference was the child tax credit went out in advance because the IRS had a pretty good idea of, one, if you had kids or not, and two, the IRS was basically like, and if we gave you too much, we don't care. It's fine this time. The EITC in DC is backwards looking. It is based on the previous year. So when people filed their tax in the spring of 2023, this was for what they earned in 2022. The reason they did that is because it is really, really hard to predict someone's EITC from year to year. Because if your income changes, or if you have another child, or if a child ages out, you can have radically different numbers. And if the DC tried to do this in advance, they would be put in a really awkward situation, or just downright bad situation of having to claw it back. So the idea was, okay, we'll just do this backwards looking. Again, the selling point is monthly. It is, trying to provide some repeat and promised income. The downside, the con, is that we don't do this with anything else. If you're a business or you're an individual, if you're a business and you get a tax credit, or you're an individual and you have a mortgage introduction, we don't say, sorry, you don't get that now. We're going to give that. It's just this one group, but we don't give them the option. And so the option on the table is to allow filers to decide, would you like to get your EITC all right now as part of your refund, or you could opt in to the monthly tax payment. Excuse me, the monthly rebate payment.
I'll just say we're working on this with a couple of council members right now to try and move an amendment to the statute to allow for either an opt-out or an opt-in provision to make sure that folks aren't at risk of losing any SNAP benefits because the monthly payment is considered regular income by the USDA, Food Nutrition Services, so.
Just to emphasize what Eric is saying, SNAP and other things are based on your income. And if you give someone a one-time rebate, the federal government says that doesn't count. But if you're getting it monthly, they will count that as income, and that's leading to the complications. Anyone else? Okay, last EITC. This would allow formerly incarcerated people to access a special EITC by accessing previous year's income. The inspiration for this proposal, which was put out by DC Legal Aid, is that when people went to file their taxes in 2021, spring of 2021, they were allowed to either use what they would typically do, which was their 2020 income, or their 2019 income. The reason they did that is because, as I said earlier, the EITC goes up with income. And so the thinking was a lot of people, through no fault of their own, lost their jobs in 2020 because of the pandemic. It reduced their income, and it was reducing their EITC. And so the federal government said, if it's more advantageous, you can go back and use your 2019 level for the calculation of this credit. And so what the proposal is that if you were a formerly incarcerated person, and say you were released from prison and began working in November, when you go to file tax, you won't have much income. But possibly the year before you were incarcerated, you did have income that would help. And so it would allow a formerly incarcerated person to grab a previous year's income amount and use that for their DC EITC so they could get a bigger credit. The argument for this is that adults re-entering the workforce start with limited resources, there are obstacles, and this is just one more thing that makes it harder for them when they only worked for half of a quarter of the year. Another is it could provide an incentive to work and file. You basically would start, filing taxes, becoming part of the system because you knew that there was a benefit to doing so that otherwise wouldn't exist. The downsides are pretty much all complexity and administrative burden, which is that when the feds did this, it was across the country, and it was just 1 year before. So everyone kind of had the data, they had the information, and the feds were doing the work. For this, DC would have to do all the work to ensure that A, the person was a formerly incarcerated person, and B, that their tax return, what they're reporting matches what their tax reporting was. For example, say someone who was using an income year from like 2016, 2015, and the formerly incarcerated person would have to have access to those documents. And just again, as someone who volunteers, it can be very challenging for the most organized and organized person to go back and find old tax returns, especially from more than 2 or 3 years ago.
Legally, give an estimate how many people we're talking about?
According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, 875 inmates were released to the District of Columbia in 2022. And it looks like it fluctuates. It can be higher, upwards of like 1,500, but roughly 700 to 1,500 every year. And most of them are ages 18 to 40.
In recent years, it's really increased. The population under the BOP's custody has gone down significantly. So they're releasing about 1,500 or so every year in recent years.
And they remain in the District of Columbia.
They do come to the District of Columbia. They generally come either through halfway homes, depending on how they are released. They could be, we're getting that bump from, all the incarcerations from early 1990s now they're coming back home.
I just think if we were to take this seriously, the general population would not understand what we were thinking. There are no tax breaks offered, or maybe they'll come in the next go around for victims of crime. None. There are no special treatments. If your store window has been broken or whatever, there's nothing. There are no benefits for the people who are victimized. The notion that in a city where crime is really in a state of emergency, that we're going to find a way to privilege returning criminals through a tax code is offensive to me. And I just can't see, under any circumstances, us doing this, because the message it sends is there are tax privileges associated with committing crime. Period. And I'm a no.
I can't imagine a scenario where somebody would think, oh, maybe I should commit this crime because I might get a tax credit later. You know, I think we have people who, you know, serve their time in prison. You don't even need to get into like what that was about. Serve their time, have been released. We want them to be successful in terms of reentry. We don't want recidivism. We want people to be able to like land on their feet, try and become productive, you know, contributors to our city. And this is one way to do that. I think people who are released from prison and then have to get started again have a really rough time finding employment, finding housing, making ends meet. And so, you know, like I think it's a question of like, do we want people to succeed when they get out of prison, or do we want them, you know, sort of thrown back into whatever situation they were in prior to?
And what we're rewarding is people who had work that was reportable and legal prior to
Right.
committing the crime. So we're basically saying to them, what you did previously was honorable in terms of your income, you reported it, get back to that. Like we're going to.
Well, and Gregory, they can get back to it as soon as they come back. They can go back to work and they can earn this. You know, but if you'll bear with me, I live at 21st and N, and in the last few months, I've been treated to the following: a murder at 21st and P, 1 block from my house. Shootings in Washington Circle, about 2.5 blocks from my house. And last week, 100 feet from the front door of my office on 19th and N, a shooting in broad daylight on Jefferson. I am in no mood to privilege that behavior through tax incentives. I'm just not. Yes, we can all root for people to get on their feet, but maybe you shouldn't do that in the first place. There are consequences. There used to be, and it used to deter people, in my mind. Now we're just like, we are normalizing and mainstreaming criminal behavior. That's just my point of view. Everyone can think differently. It's a majority vote around here. But I'm telling you how I feel. This sends a terrible signal. If you were to ask the average citizen on the street, do you think we should give tax breaks to parents or to formerly incarcerated through earned income tax credit? We should poll that and figure out what people think.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So CISOSA has data on returning citizens and whether they're employed, employable, whatnot. And we kind of did some work on this, looking at what are the barriers to employment. But can you remind me, will this apply to, first, is it forward-looking, backward-looking? Does it apply to everyone who has at some point been in prison and have come back? Or does it apply to people under supervision, parole, probation? Or does it mean that you have to get a job to qualify for this, or does it apply to anyone? Because that number can be very large depending on how we kind of capture this group.
So this proposal from DC Legal Aid was, the crux was, we've shown that you can do something with a previous year's tax return on your current year tax return. And that's pretty much where their proposal stopped. I think, yes, to your point, those are things that could, if it was something the group wanted to do, fill in those blanks. And it could put further limits on not only what tax years can possibly apply, but also what type of workers and what types of individuals would be eligible for this. Although that again gets into the complexity of having to make sure that that's checked and for something like this.
Yeah, and about a quarter of the folks who are under CISOSA supervision, the year we looked at this data, they had about 9,000 people under supervision. They had so significant mental health issues that like they wouldn't. I'm kind of curious. It's a big group. No one really even knows how many returning citizens there are in DC. I think there's the number that Washington Post threw out, 67,000 or so. But we really don't know. So I think we should try to put our arms around it. I think, David, to your point, I totally understand your anger at this proposal. I can feel your anger. We already throw a lot of resources at returning citizens, so maybe it's not as so much in your face, like we'll give you a tax break. I think it's kind of important to take a step back and think about whether just something like this improves the chances of becoming productive. I mean, the reason we're experiencing crime is not necessarily where, you know, it's about the crime lab, it's about the prosecution. I mean, there's a whole lot of other stuff that's going on. So I'm not sure how I would rank this in this bigger scheme of things.
Well, there's an open-air drug market a block from my office in 21st and N, right where Connecticut hits Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, an open-air drug market, and there was a shooting there. Fortunately, no one was killed. And so, you know, I don't think it's about the messages that we're sending. I don't think anyone here wants to see someone after they're released fail. But I think when there are scarce tax dollars, the way in which we decide to use those tax dollars sends a message to the population about the things we value and the things we want to encourage. And I'm a hard no with that. I believe personally there are better investments to make than in people who have committed crimes. There's nothing for victims in this tax proposal. There's no restitution, there's no nothing. We don't require people who commit crimes to engage in restitution. We don't require them to square accounts with the cost of incarceration and their costs on the criminal justice system, the police system, and everything else. I think this is madness, it's just my view, but I think if you ask the average person on the street, they would think we will have lost our minds.
There's no.
Well, I wouldn't want to see a tax code that was put to a vote of the public for any reason, actually, but.
God forbid.
But I think it'd be helpful to know from the DC Legal Aid, how many of people that are subject to recidivism were unemployed at the time of their recidivism? And how much would this make a difference in somebody's getting a job or not, or getting, or getting whatever it is? Like it's a nice in theory, but is there any data that actually shows its impact on recidivism and the ability to get a job, which I bet you leads to not recidivism. Mm-hmm. So it'd be helpful to know whether there's any data that says that, because otherwise it's don't know about the cause and effect actually.
It seems impractical that someone is going to seek a job for the benefit of this tax credit if they're in this circumstance. So if there's data that shows how people are motivated or not based on this opportunity, that would be helpful. It just seems impractical that that's the logic one would have in this circumstance, to be employed or unemployed.
Yeah, we can go back and we can ask, but I will note that I don't think we went looking, and this is kind of what we got. So I think the questions that are being asked, while incredibly important, are a little bit beyond the scope of like a tax commission and what we can pull in a short amount of time. But I respect it, and we can definitely ask and see what is out there.
I will say, we have retailers closing up every day because of crime in the city, and I can give you guys a whole list of 15, 20 in the last 3 to 4 months. They're left and they're opening in our partnering jurisdictions, and crime would be a huge part of it, not to mention how difficult it is just to do business in the city. I think that we do invest. I think the city does invest in trying to bring people back. I think there is great investment in that, but I just think with everything in front of us, I'm not sure that this is one that makes an impact and could do a lot more harm than good.
When David has if you put even the substance aside, there would be I think that's a PR problem with this. That we recommended formerly incarcerated people get a tax benefit. And given this environment, I think it'd be a pretty tough sell.
Okay, I like that. Let's pivot to something a little more cheering, childcare. Now how to transition. So this is a proposal to simplify and expand DC childcare tax benefits. And as a person who talks about this, I want to be very clear, this is not the same as the child tax credit. These are tax credits for child care. The biggest difference is the one we talked about earlier is you got a kid, you get it. This one, we'll talk about the nuances, but you gotta pay for child care to get it. Currently, the district offers 2 tax credits for child care expenses. One is the Keep Child Care Affordable Tax Credit, which was enacted in 2019. That credit, to get it, you must have a child younger than age 4 as of September 30, paid for services in the district, and have taxable income less than roughly $157,000. Those credits, the maximum credit can be $1,000, and 781 filers claimed it, according to the last tax expenditure report. It only costs $520,000, which shows that few people are claiming it and few people are getting relatively marginal benefits. There is a second one they can claim, and it's tied to the federal non-refundable tax credit. So this is 32% of what you get on your federal tax return. You also get that one on your DC return. But this one's different. This one, you can have a qualifying child under age 13, and your expenses are capped $3,000 and $6,000. The benefits for this will range from roughly $200 to $330 for the filer. And the tax benefit report said that far more people claim this. Roughly 18,000 filers claim this, and it costs $3.5 million. And then pertinent information, according to DCFBI, the average annual cost of childcare in DC is $23,000.
How much?
$23,000 for an annual childcare. Okay, the proposal on the table would be to combine all this into one tax credit. So DC would only offer one tax credit for childcare. It would apply to all children younger than age 13, so that we would have the same age cutoff as the federal credit.
Through what age?
13, younger than 13. Because that's the federal rule, and so it'd be simplicity, would be like it's the same on both your federal and DC. Kid younger than 30, you can get this. It would be 50% of your child care expenses for expenses up to $6,000 for one child, $12,000 for multiple children, which means the maximum credits would be $3,000 and $6,000. We would change the cap and the phase out and push it up to $200,000 for a single parent, $400,000 for married filers. Why you would do this? The credit that's being proposed here is, first of all, it's just far simpler. It's 1 instead of 2. It matches the federal guidelines and has bigger income phase outs. It also would be far more broad than tax credits offered for childcare in other jurisdictions. The credits in Maryland and Virginia are relatively small, although all state credits for this are relatively small. And it would kind of target a group that we've talked about in the past and even talked about tonight. Basically, young adults with children who are spending a lot of money on childcare services because they want to live in the district. And it would be a way of extending tax relief directly to them. The arguments against it is that it would flow to higher income households. This is true of just about any tax credit aimed at childcare. Because think about it, to get the credit, you have to spend a lot of money. And to spend a lot of money on childcare, you've got to have a relatively large amount of money. I've lost the other side of that. So I think that's about all the points I wanted to make. We do have a distributional, chart. There we go. Thank you, Nick. So this proposal would affect 3% of DC households. Again, because to get this, remember for like the CTC, it was like 12% of households. So for this, you got to have both have kids and be spending a significant amount on this. The income group with the largest share of households benefiting would be those who earn between $200,000 and $500,000. 7% of those households would benefit. But you'd see roughly similar shares of households between $30,000 and $50,000, and you still see 3% of those earning less than $30,000. Very broadly speaking, if you're getting this tax benefit, you get roughly $1,000 if you're low income, $2,000 if you're middle income, and $2,500 if you're highest income. And again, that's because the people at the higher income levels are typically spending more on childcare, and so that's why they are eligible for more of the benefit. Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
So I vaguely remember the 2019 credit as a package of supports for families who had children. It was thematic in that particular year of the budget. And I wonder what the other investments in childcare have done and impacted, had they impacted sort of the family population that was thought of by that series of investments. That would be helpful to know as I consider sort of what the impact of this might be and whether or not it's helpful or not helpful.
And just, that's something we can follow up on, but you are absolutely correct. So like, I talked about how there's like limits on this. You have to have age 4 by September 30. You have to, basically all that is because it was a part of this. And so the idea was you would benefit from something until you couldn't, and then you would benefit from this. And so yes, that's.
What's the 13 and under?
That's the federal credit.
Why would we do that? Most children are not in childcare. Is this after school care? Is it eligible?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
Or summertime.
Richard, could this be tailored? Oh, I'm sorry.
Just summertime. I mean, DC is.
So that's the federal rule.
Oh, because of the summer.
Yeah, that's
The assumption that people are going to childcare camp something in the summer.
But yeah, that's how people get it.
I'm just curious, is there any evidence that suggests that incentivizing childcare like this could help bring people back to work post-pandemic? Because what I'm thinking is if I'm at home, if I'm able to work from home, then maybe I don't go downtown, I don't buy the goods and services downtown. And it's easy because I can just watch my child at home. But maybe if I can somehow incentivize the child care, people might be more inclined to go back to the office. I don't know, I'm just curious about that.
I can talk to you a little bit. Truth and disclosure, I'm an advisor to the Under 3 Coalition, unpaid of course, so I've kind of been dabbling in this stuff. There's a lot of data that shows that for lower income or lower salary people, especially females, unstable childcare situations are the single biggest deterrent for them keeping a job and advancing in it. And it's I think more than sickness, the single biggest cause of absenteeism in the workplace for people of all incomes. Then we've, as a city, I think made great strides now through the Birth Through 3 Act and the other things of mandating that these workers maybe it's actually fully implemented now, but have bachelor's degrees. And our philosophy now is that childcare is really an outdated term. It really should be early education, that every single time a child, even an infant, is in the hands of an adult, is an educational opportunity. So those costs of providing the care have gone up because we have mandated that everybody have a bachelor's degree, and now we subsidize for the city a lot of the salaries to bring people up to incentivize it. I think the early read of it is successful, but there's a tremendous shortage of slots still. And upper income people also say that trying to attract people to come to the city when you can have a stable childcare slot in my building or around the corner is a major recruitment tool. And so I think this has great economic development potential. And much as we said before about targeting, the middle income tax relief, this is kind of another place where families whom we want to have stay, whom we want to have their kids, last till they reach the 5th or 6th grade, which we know is a problem. This is a reason for people to leave because it's high cost, but also there are a few slots. So the city also, I think, needs to incentivize more slots. And one question I would have is, do we stipulate that the child care provider has to be in the city?
You could.
I think
So I'm not too interested in incentivizing somebody to work in Roslyn and drop their kids off there, but
Why did the workers have to have a bachelor's degree? I'm sorry, I'm
training and ability to actually deliver education to a child. It's an educational venue, it's not babysitting. And so there's a methodology and a skill set of actually teaching an infant. That's not just something you learn from your beloved grandma, like you can actually go to school and learn it, so.
And that's for lead teachers, though. There would be other, there are other people who are assisting that may not have that same level of credential.
The uptake though, on the Keep Child Care Affordable Tax Credit seems really.
Yeah,
low.
700 people, yeah.
That's,
Why?
so that was part of my question, understanding, okay, of all of the investments of increasing subsidies and providing locations at, sort of subsidized cost at new facilities and rec centers and increasing slots, like what has happened in that space that has, because I agree, investing in, childcare, because it's a pretty cost prohibitive expense for middle-class families in particular is super important. But I want to make sure if we make an investment or support a tax benefit there that ends up costing or penciling at millions, that it actually is improving the circumstance. I mean, I'm shocked to hear that only 700 families took this one.
I mean, one thing to note about it is that if you receive any subsidy for your childcare costs, you can't use it, you can't get this credit, so you can't, like say you're getting a portion of your childcare expenses covered with subsidy, you can't claim this credit to cover the rest or to cover another portion of it.
So think of it this way, there are about 22,000 kids under the age of 3 in DC. So who would potentially be benefiting from this? About 75% of the households, both parents are working. So there's about, there's a certain portion where there's at least one caregiver at home who can be a substitute. And then you have multiple kid families where the costs are so high, so you're spending $23,000 for one kid, $23,000 for the other, then you can actually get a nanny who can come to your house and make things easier. Our capacity in DC is about 12,000 seats, right, for child licensed seats, and then we offer subsidies for about 6,000 seats. Am I getting these numbers correct?
Yeah, and they now make, I think, $44,000 as an entry level with the bachelor's degree. And you can now go get a free degree at UDC as well, I think.
Right, that's
But, yeah.
the south side. So the potential target is about 6,000 kids who can benefit from this. And so if you have 2 kids per family, I'm just making this up. So you're actually reaching, a significant number of parents.
Who would be eligible?
Yes. Because we are subsidizing so much, we're taking half the kids out.
Well, Rachel, what about the, I don't know if kids stipulate that, but I hear among friends that some who live in communities that have matter of right pre-K-3, and some don't. So there's a huge swath of the city, because of building constraints, that pre-K-3 is not offered as a matter of right. And so would some of these incentives help that population that doesn't have it?
It's a good question. There are a handful of kids who attend early care centers, their child development centers, about the age of 3. There aren't that many. First, we've done a good job expanding the pre-K3 and pre-K4 slots, so much that some of the seats go unused right now, but that's also like a locational thing.
Right, there's no space in Ward 3 schools for pre-K-3.
Right, that's right. So those kids can go somewhere else. Those kids can go somewhere else, but parents choose not to do that in some cases. But there's definitely, it definitely opens the door for parents to send their kids to early development centers, which will actually help with some of the economic struggles there. When we started offering, kindergarten and then pre-K classes, we started taking these kids out of child development centers. And child development centers generally charge the same to parents for all kids of all age, but the older kids were subsidizing the younger kids because they don't require that many teachers and things like that. Now, as more of these older kids leave the system, the child development
But
centers...
I would bet most of this, right, if you tell me if I'm wrong, most of this is going to apply to, in terms of quantity and number of kids and money, 0 through 3.
Yeah, most of it. But I think David's point is you can also bring back older kids.
I was just curious about how it worked and whether or not, there may be pockets in our current pre-K through 3-4 all over the city where there may or may not be slots. And if there's a way to equalize things by a credit like this, it's worth exploring, but I don't think it's,
I think for in terms of you all and the magic you're gonna do with this document, it'd be great to wrap all this up in a narrative that goes to middle income and lower middle income and upper lower income families. And whether it be the child tax credit or this or an income tax rate, what we're doing to secure those people's destiny in the city. Because it's probably not gonna be through property taxes, because they may not own a home and it's whatever, but that packages of everything we discussed tonight might make a very powerful narrative.
Do you have a way of looking at how many, like, if you pursued these changes, would you increase from 700 families to some other number? Like, do we know how many would
Well,
be captured?
if you merge them, obviously, you're gonna get, there's 18,000, we're now getting the much broader federally based credit. I think it's an important question as to why that 781 number is so low. I just don't even, I'm not even sure who to ask, I'm not sure who managed. One of the problems when you run things through the tax code is there's not an agency carefully keeping an eye on the programmatic dimensions of it. I mean, we can ask ORA, but I think they're gonna say, I don't know, that's who applied for it,
Right.
Unless, sometimes tax credits do have another agency who's sort of in charge of eyeball of making sure credits.
Did this come from a commissioner? Was this?
So, no, this came out of our review
Oh.
of the tax expenditure report, and it just jumped out at us that we had this very poorly utilized large credit that was kind of overlapping the other one. I think the question for you all, and we don't have to answer it right now, is would you rather focus more resource and energy on a larger, say, just child tax credit? Or do you want to do sort of more things, but maybe at a slightly smaller level than others we possible given sort of finite resource? How does this stack up with a child tax credit, for instance?
I would spend more on the child tax credit, but I would try to do both.
Both being,
Sorry, the child tax credit and the child care tax credit, both,
okay.
which we should call early education, just
If a lot of
saying.
people aren't taking advantage, are we better to just focus on the child tax credit?
it's
and
more
try to do
flexibility, isn't
more?
there, for that?
Right, and try to do more since it impacts so many more people.
But the
We might wanna
combination
find
of
out.
the two, you'll pick
We
up.
might want to find out from under 3, this is 32 million, this proposal, but is there, greater benefit? Obviously, we're not deciding spending decisions, but putting that money into like fulfilling up to 3 and taking another step
Kim
there.
Perry participated in one of our sessions. I wonder if she spoke, do you know if she spoke to this, her testimony?
Matt
I
Hansen
wasn't
came
there that day.
instead, her chief of staff came instead.
Okay.
And he did not, but we might just ask them.
Yeah, okay.
If that's a better.
Okay. I've got, speaking of kids, I have to go get.
Get child care.
Are they at her
I have
education
child
center?
care issues, yeah.
You need a tax break?
You need a tax break for these kids.
Okay, next is I-11, increase the deduction for public school teacher
Did we
expenses.
already talk about 9? Did we already do 9?
9 was an EITC we threw in for all the child workers.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. Okay, so I-11, increase deduction for public school teachers. So currently there is a federal deduction for $500. And then there is there's a federal deduction for up to $300 and there's one for in DC for up to $500. A teacher, and this is for, a teacher spends money on school supplies and brings them in, and so it's to get compensated for what the teacher spent out of his or her own pocket. The proposal would increase the DC deduction to $1,000, and currently a teacher cannot claim the same expenses on their federal return and on the district return. And this would allow the educator to claim the same expenses for both the DC and federal reduction. The argument is that it's a way to support teachers, and also it would simplify a problem. Honestly, as a tax volunteer, I didn't even know you couldn't claim the same expenses. The arguments against it is that it would be regressive because it would go to teachers with higher income, because the way the deduction works by lowering taxable income, those with higher income and taxable rates would get the biggest benefit. But the ORA estimates this would reduce revenue by about $144,000 a year.
How much?
$144,000.
This is like a rounding error.
Right.
This just seems like an easy yes to me.
Okay.
How much is it? 140?
44,000.
Okay.
How often do teachers run over the funds? Must be very.
Oh, new teachers.
Don't we have a
Spend more than, like,
Yeah.
spend out of pocket more
by
than.
one estimate, DC teachers spend $527 out of pocket.
Oh, wow, yeah, we should do
I
that.
think they're spending a lot of money out of pocket.
And again, it would also just be a signal of, we want teachers to live in the district and be here and be part of the community. Okay, II-12. Okay, this would restore personal exemption for seniors and the blind. So we talked about in previous meetings, the district conforms with a lot of federal law. And in fact, as a result of the 2013 commission, it conforms with the federal standard deduction and the federal personal exemption. That was done in 2013 as a way to increase tax relief because those federal levels were higher than DC's and make it simpler for DC filers. Of course, after DC passed its change, Congress changed the law where it greatly increased the introduction and got rid of the personal exemption. That matters to these groups because if you itemize your deductions, instead of taking the standard deduction, you saw no benefit from the increase in the standard deduction. But if you're a senior or blind, you lost the personal exemption or extra, or the extra, I think it was the extra standard deduction you got under the previous one. So this would bring it back. It would create a personal exemption for these groups. It would be roughly $4,500. The argument for it is it would help seniors and blind residents. And again, it would help this group who lost something as a result of the interaction between the changes more than the actual changes. The argument against it is it's poorly targeted. Again, you have to have considerable income to benefit from this at all, and then specifically we're talking about people who itemize, so they have even more income. According to, we ran it, 65% of the total benefit would go to households with more than $100,000.
I mean, I'm obviously more sympathetic to the issue of blind and the means tested if possible. Again, I'd like to our earlier discussion, just look at the totality of benefits we offer to segments, to swim lanes of population. You know, we have a pretty, again, I appreciate this only applies to property owners, but for our seniors who are property owners, especially those who are moderate to low income, there's very generous reductions in real property tax. So again, that doesn't apply for seniors who are renters. And so maybe if this could be means tested somehow, without making life overly complex for Glenn, that seems to
I
be.
wouldn't worry about that.
I don't want him to leave. So I need to.
Oh, right, that's true.
Yeah. But I don't know if this is just generally speaking as a broad-based relief, you know, for across the board, if this would be where my priorities would be.
The DC's council budget office, Jan Budow's team, put together a study on all the benefits that the District of Columbia government offers to senior residents. I think it would be important to share that with the rest of the commissioners. It's a pretty long list.
You know, it'd be nice personally to know kind of what we do in each of our swim lanes, each of our buckets, what the average, you know, let's take a middle-class family, like what benefits they get, or a lower-income family. When you put the totality of after-tax benefits, what's it worth? What's Medicaid worth? What are, housing vouchers worth, or so on and so on. I think it might be a bit of an eye-opener to see just what each segment is getting, and then look to have a judgment about how do we balance that in a fair way. We might learn that the small sliver in the middle is really getting sucked. Or that we have disincentivized certain things because of these benefits.
That's a really good suggestion.
Those can put that together.
It'll be hard.
Yeshua, I've looked to your organization. Have you, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, I think that'd be enormously valuable.
Let me think about that. It's a really good suggestion. It will be a heavy lift. I mean, I'm just looking at the Council Budget Office's report on just the seniors. They've identified 90 programs that are supporting seniors. 90. I'm pretty sure if there are 90, there's probably even 91, 92 that they missed something somewhere. So, there's sort of like the program side. There's also the tax expenditure side, which you can allocate to different, I think, the tax expenditure report is great. It already kind of gives us a sense. Let me think about that, David. It's a great suggestion. Let me choose over it, guys.
Okay, speaking of seniors, the next one is restore the pension exclusion, and this was proposed by the coalition to restore the DC pension benefit. Okay, in 2013, there was a $3,000 exclusion for pension or annuity income, but it had to come from the DC or federal government. Any other source didn't count, only DC federal government. In 2013, one of our goals was to find ways to broaden and simplify, but also provide more tax relief for low and middle income households. That commission made a trade, and it said we are going to significantly raise the standard deduction, which everyone can get. But in a trade, to make sure there's some balance, we got rid of some tax expenditures. And one of those tax expenditures was the pension exclusion, because we argued it was targeting a very narrow slice of the district, whereas our proposal was going to benefit pretty much anyone that wanted it. This would bring it back, and it would increase it to a 10,000 or 20,000 exclusion depending on the filer's age. The argument for it is that it would bring back the previous benefit and would help retirement government employees. The argument against it are essentially the arguments that the 2013 Commission made, which is that this only goes to a small segment, and that we significantly increase the standard deduction to help all of these residents, and then also, given the changes that have been made to the district's tax system since this exclusion went away, if you brought it back, 2/3 of the benefits would go to households earning more than $75,000.
This would be a lovely thing to do. I would rank it at the bottom of the list. Don't imagine would ever be right above that for me.
Look, if I'm honest, what troubled me about what we did then was the unfair imposition of people who had settled expectations, having made investments based on this tax exempt status and planned their retirement around it. And then there's something kind of unfair about people doing right, playing by the rules, and then having the rug yanked out from them, under them in a retirement moment. So I get that we had an increased deduction. I don't know if it necessarily was a wash and made these people whole. What makes sense would be to sunset it and give people a chance to send a signal to future savers, don't do this because you're not going to get it. But holding the people at a certain age harmless. It's like changing the Social Security
But didn't they
benefit.
replace it with another?
But I don't think it's a one-to-one, Joe. I don't think it's a one-to-one.
Broadly speaking, if you were higher income, you lost because maybe you're itemizing, and so the standard deduction increase didn't help you. But if you were low middle, it was a wash. So it was a wash for some, but it was not specifically a one-to-one. There were winners and losers, as there often are with those tax reform proposals.
When did the council approve this elimination?
2014, but then it was phased in, and so I don't know explicitly what year it took effect, but 2014.
It was a recommendation from the last tax rate.
Do we know what a threshold income level is for itemizing?
Now, given the changes to it, I mean, it's high. It's like hundreds of thousands. I think we're down to like, now I'm just thinking nationally because I don't have the DC data on me, but like fewer than 10% of people nationally itemize now because of the larger standard deductions or the CCJA.
And you wouldn't trade it, right? So you wouldn't benefit from this unless you were itemizing, yes, maybe? Or would you?
There are probably some, given, especially, I mean, like, yes, I'm just talking about seniors. given your sources of income and given what could be excluded, there are ways that it could possibly affect people in different groups, but by and large, those would be, broadly speaking, those would benefit.
They wouldn't be advocating for it if it wouldn't benefit them, let's be honest, right?
Right.
And so, again, I want to go back to settled expectations and promises, and people making, certain decisions, how they organize their lives based on decades of tax practice in the city, and then it changes on them. I'm all for phasing it in for those folks, if you're at a certain point in time, fine. Sending the signals that we're not gonna do it anymore. I don't know how we do it, Glenn, in a way that we're able to, to be fair. It's just all about line drawing. I'm very sympathetic about playing by the rules and having the rules change right when you are at the end of the road.
Mm-hmm. I think, I understand what you're saying. There's been 8 years of retirements, 8 years of retirees that knew about this change before they retired, had options to work longer. So in some ways, this ages itself out quickly. And if I understand what you're saying, you're suggesting that we understand how many retirees retired before this time period and figure out.
It's a very hard, academic and practical exercise.
Right.
I get that.
Yeah. It's entirely possible because we should have the records of these folks, so we should know that as opposed to a variety of different pensioners that we don't know. But every year you don't do this and you therefore say, well, you should have known better, is a lot of people that are out of the system. Yeah. So.
All right, I propose we do one more this evening, and I'm gonna propose we jump ahead to the one that we've leveled miscellaneous number 4, because it's something that came up earlier in conversation. The reason it was leveled miscellaneous number 4 and not we didn't give it an individual in the code is that when we started working on this, we wanted to leave ourselves the opportunity of doing it through any number of different tax venues. So this is an idea, and again, the inspiration for the idea was David's suggestion around an opportunity account, so if you don't mind us crediting you for it, but it's not, David did not design this, we took on the challenge of converting that idea into figuring out how would we do something through the tax code. No endorsement applied. So as we talked about before, the opportunity accounts is a 4-to-1 match savings programs. Simply put, if you deposit up to $1,500, you receive an additional $6,000. Right now, we've got private and nonprofit funders, and also funding through DISB that goes into it. The program is managed by Capital Area Asset Builders, but again, they did not submit this proposal, so I won't blame it on them. Participants have to be below 80% of the DC median household income, so that varies a little bit by family size. $63,000 for a single person, $91,000 for a household of 4, and have less than $10,000 in assets. There is money management training and asset-specific training that is required before they can get access to the matching funds. And it's right now there's about 800 people participating, and they estimate about 375 participants on the wait list. So the program is limited by the amount of money in the program. So there's 2 ideas we came up with to use the tax code to expand the impact of the program. One focuses on providing a tax credit to anyone, an individual or a corporation. They could get a non-refundable tax credit for donations to this program. Other states have done similar kinds of donations for a particular, similar kind of credits for donations to a particular program. You get a 50% tax credit in addition to your itemized deductions. It basically comes close to being a dollar for dollar match if a donor gives an amount into the program. So let's say you said, and presumably you would have some kind of mechanisms to cap the program. So DISB might certify a certain number of donors. And so you could that way generate several $1 million, any amount you specified really, in investments in the program, which would allow it to go further. The other approach, which could be, you could do them separately, you could do them together, would actually be targeted at the recipients themselves. Again, we would provide, DC would provide a refundable tax credit that would match the participants' contributions to the program. That would effectively expand the public investment in the program and allow more people to participate. I'm somewhat oversimplifying, and I think there'd be more work to do to design exactly how it would work, but I'm confident that we could make it work. I think there's good research that shows that programs like this support wealth building, home ownership, business ownership, and also this would, by making it a bigger program, we increase the word about the program. Probably people might be even more likely to apply. I think the arguments against it are it's a rifle shot program, right? It's affecting several hundred, maybe even if it grew, a few thousand people. And in addition, it's creating somewhat preferential treatment relative to other charitable causes if you went through a tax credit. It does also put OTR a little bit in a new role, and DASB would also have an administrative role. So there's some administrative details to be worked out. But an advantage of this approach would be you could scale the amount of the credit to how big you want it to, how much of an impact you want it to have through the tax code. I think there's also, David suggested we could simply create an option for people to deposit their child tax credit refund into a program like this. And certainly that's doable. I don't think that by itself would expand the program, because a big appeal of this program is that match, the 6,000 that matches the original 1,500. Thoughts?
I just want to thank you, Nick, and the staff for taking the suggestion. Seriously, I mean that. And for putting the work and the thought into this. I appreciate it very much, so thank you. I believed in this program 20 plus years ago when I authored it. I believe in it today. I believe in rewarding people who try and save. I realize it's hard when every day is a struggle. I think that savings is a great message of responsibility and of sacrifice in a house. I think the government has a responsibility for those families to match and make it worthwhile, and this match makes it worthwhile. I think in a generation you could see at these kinds of match rates, you can see people with real resources for college, for continuing education, or job training, or medical emergencies, retirements, home ownership. It could be a game changer. It may be small to start. I'll totally concede that. I think these programs have to evolve, and they have to be sensitive to how populations change and shift. I think that's critical to its evolution and success. But if we want to talk about ending, wealth disparities, which I very much support, then there's no better way than ending them. And this is the way to do it. And I think the population as a whole would see this as an extension of an earned income tax credit, because it's rewarding a certain behavior. Just as we reward work, we reward savings and investment into your family. Price is relatively minor, I imagine, too.
Yes, he's our tourist.
All right. With that, we are done. Thank you all. We'll carry the rest over to a future meeting. 2 more review sessions.
When are our next 2 meetings, or when?
19th and the 24th.
So we got Thursday, Tuesday.
There's next Thursday, a week from Thursday, during the day.
There is one message. I thought we were missing the week.
We should be able to get through most of them next time. I think we won't have, depending how many we have to carry. We'll get most of the important.